Welcome. You're watching episode 140 of Regional Wrap, pre-recorded on Monday, the 11th of July. Regional Wrap, providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, from Canapés in Canberra to Tams in Tamworth, is my guest, Vikki Campion, homemaker, political columnist, and TNT radio host. Vikki was born and raised on the tablelands of far north Queensland and has had 22 years of experience in journalism, including nearly a decade as a political staffer and media advisor to ministers in both the New South Wales and federal parliaments. Now living on a rural pastoral property about Tamworth, New South Wales, Vikki continues to be a columnist for many of the News Limited mastheads, as well as hosting her own program on the independent TNT radio network. Welcome, Vikki.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Now, I know your dad.
You do?
Reasonably well. But you can fill us on your life in a little bit on the tablelands of your childhood, because I expect it's a lot different place. Well, actually, I don't suspect it's a much different place because we haven't had a lot of development in the 12 years that I've lived here. But maybe you can shed a little bit of light on how things were back in your childhood up there. The changes you're seeing when you occasionally visit now, and what you hope for North Queensland in the future.
It was, I think it was, where do you start with that? Look, I grew up in Tolga. It means red mud in Aboriginal. It was, it was a potato farming community. It was a peanut farming community. Did a lot of corn, did a lot of exotic fruits. It was very small. We had a butcher, we had a baker, and we had a cane store furniture shop. In the
Don't forget the pub.
Oh yeah, the pub.
I've been there.
Love that pub. So it was a lot. I think that Tolga itself was a lot smaller then. It's certainly grown since with a lot of residential development up in Tandara and around there. But it was a really good basis for for what I do now, because it was this place where it's a low socioeconomic area. It isn't it's not the Gold Coast. You're not dealing with flash amounts of wealth. It was very kind of dominated by farm workers or farmers or people who were providing services to the town, whether they're a nurse or a prison officer or a school teacher or a bank teller. But it's, in the last kind of couple of decades, one thing that actually makes me really sad is how little the Atherton Tablelands has progressed or has grown economically. They had, when I first started journalism there as a cadet at the Tableland newspaper, it's now gone, but that's where I started. And one of the first stories I did, which was one of the saddest, definitely, where you're just walking around just seeing grown men cry, was the last tobacco sale. And this was where the coalition government at that point, it was a Liberal National government, had decided we don't want to have any tobacco grown anymore in North Queensland. This was their first move to get rid of growing tobacco altogether from the country. And so we're just going to shut it down. You guys have to diversify. And this is more the Mareeba Dimbula region. They have never recovered from that. You can't just say to a community, just diversify, just do something different, grow something else. And that was kind of one of the first things that made me go, hold on a second. No one is listening to us. There was another thing that occurred, which was, so it was the tobacco, then they also did the dairy deregulation. I can't remember, there was something else, but essentially what it meant was we had all these politicians coming into the region, and they were telling telling me as this young 17-year-old girl reporter how this was going to be so much better. And then I was looking around going, hang on, but it's not. And here's everyone, when you're talking to real people about their lives, is your life better since this policy came into place? Is your life better since they ripped away your livelihood? That definitely wasn't the case. And it made me, it did kind of stir me up a bit. And when I went into politics many, many years later, it was that thing that I saw again, which was, okay, here are people who are not listening to the regions. You are not listening to us. And it's something that I still see now. And that's why I've taken the show on with TNT, is because we do have this ever increasing media drought, particularly in regional communities, particularly in North Queensland, where they lost the Tableland newspaper. Did they lose the Advertiser, Bill?
The advertiser's gone. The only one
Yep.
is the Express News, which is independent, run by Carl Portella up in Mariba. That's it.
See, this is it. Like when I was there, I thought that we were in a media desert, but we had 3 reporters. There was myself, there was a girl called Barbara, and there was a boy from the Cairns Post called Steve. But we had 3 reporters. Now there would be none in that area. And so I was able to present opinions and put people forward because I was this because I was in this privileged role of being, a 17-year-old girl reporter up there. But, I will never forget kind of when I was criticizing this stuff in the paper, and I wasn't using my own words. Now I'm an opinion columnist, right? I'm a political commentator, so I criticize people in my own voice, in my own terms. But you're still doing that research. But back then I was not doing that. I was just reporting what local businesses were saying, what local farmers were saying, what local farm workers were saying, and that was it. And I remember having a national senator at the time come in to my office, and we were a little newspaper. It was mostly just us girls, and he was just like, you can't telling me you can't write this, you can't do this, you've got to. And it was just like, oh my God, you are just so out of touch, mate. You are so out of touch that you think that you can come in here and tell me what to write, tell me what I should be doing. You're down there in Canberra. You haven't even spoken to anyone else up here. He literally got in a car, went to an airport, jumped out of the car, went into my office to blow me up. Without even, it's like, well, why don't you go and touch base with one of these business owners that I've been speaking to first?
Yeah, well, go and talk to a half a dozen of former tobacco growers who were making a good living out of that and just had it all shut down on the basis of virtual signalling. And that was probably one of the earliest virtual signalling episodes, when people decided, or governments decided, well, smoking is no good for you. Adults can't make their own decisions. So we're going to make it as difficult as we can for you to have cigarettes. And not only that, although it will still be legal, we'll make it illegal or impossible for Australians to actually grow the product. And I'm pretty sure Mariba produced a fairly sized crop, and it was good material. And much better probably than what comes through the door these days from tobacco growing regions in Asia and things like that.
Then they
but
took
this
it.
is the first sign of Canberra and Brisbane making our decisions for us without any thought of the consequences to the local communities.
Well, this is what they did, right? So they created this committee called ATSRAC, and ATSRAC's job was, they were going, because they've shut down tobacco and they deregulated dairy, and there was something else, like I said, I just can't put my finger on what it was. They because they've done all this stuff and to the local industry, they were going to put in this government fund, and then they were going to fund all these different things, and we were going to diversify. And some of the things that they did was they gave Golden Circle, for example, we're going to give you hundreds of thousands of dollars for a feasibility study on a canning factory. Now, 20 years, I hate to think how long, 23 years later, obviously never eventuated. Is there a canning factory in Far North Queensland? No, there's not. All the money that these projects, all the money from ATSRAC that was supposed to go to these projects, none of the projects, or there is a few that that remained, but the bulk of it never survived, never saw the light of day. Projects just went.
But usually they're just a big feeding frenzy for consultants and schemesters, because we've got the same situation now with the sugar industry. They're going through some difficult times and that, and they're looking at diversification into biofuels and things like that. And we've just had the Mosman mill. It's basically closed down. They're getting this last crop and sending it down to Mosman by road, which I don't know what the value of the cane is versus transporting it 70 or 80 kilometres by road. What the value in that is, but the thing is that decision started some time ago, and the government, federal and state, reckon they've put in about $40 million into keeping the mill going. But that's not true. None of that money has got to the mill to improve it, or to the cane growers. That money has been milked by the studies and surveys and everything else. There's no net value that's gone to the community up at Mosman. It's gone to KMPG and other people, and Brisbane and Sydney, that do these studies. And it seems to be the case in so many things. The government's come up with these ideas, but the main beneficiaries are multinationals or consulting firms in the capital cities.
And this is something that I've written about a little, like a little to a lot. It goes to lobbyists, and I often say that the greatest mine is Parliament House, and it's just an open mine for subsidies where you just dig and dig and you just keep getting taxpayers' money, and it's going to things that we are never going to see actually help a single Australian. Billions and billions of dollars, which is going into their wind and solar factories for intermittent power, of course, which will never make power, which won't in the long term make power cheaper whatsoever, and is certainly not now making power cheaper. One of the things that it blew my mind when I joined the federal government, because I did do a couple of years with the state, New South Wales Deputy Premier, and the Minister for Police, Justice, Arts and Racing, I think that was his title. And the laws in New South Wales were a lot more strict about who could be influencing you and who has access to you. Then I went to Canberra, and it was a free for all. You would literally be at your desk working and have a consultant, or they call themselves consultants, but they're not. They're grifters, they're greasers, they're lobbyists. You'd have one of them they've got a little orange pass, and they can just walk in, go literally right up to your desk and tell you and take your time. A normal person, of course, if one of my neighbors from Tolga wanted to come down and talk to them about, maybe the land council or any of the, or the tobacco concerns that they had, they would not be let in the building. In fact, they wouldn't be let in the building without an escort. You need someone to come in and sign you in if you want to go into any of those back rooms. So there's this great disparity between the access that you have as a constituent and the access that you have as a lobbyist. And it's those lobbyists which are they're the ones who helped pump some $60 million into the Yes case for the Voice, which didn't help a single Far North Queensland Indigenous child get ahead in life. Imagine what they could have done with that kind of money. All that money went to advertising, consultants, people with blonde hair and blue eyes in Sydney and Melbourne.
and politicians flying over business class around the place and overseas to spruik it as well. So that's a
business
bit of a
class isn't
worry.
even half of it. It's the VIPs. That's where that's where the money is. Like they have basically they have these their RAF jets essentially, and they fly the Prime Minister around, and the Deputy Prime Minister, and then various other ministers can apply for a VIP. And it gets determined by what's called the Special Minister of State. What is exactly special about this role, we do not know. But one of the things that he does manage is who gets to fly on a VIP. And it's the VIPs that are really, like if you fly, like, okay, here, this is it, right? So my kids, here's an example. My kids do not like flying with mummy, because with mummy, you get, it's
Oh,
very
what to
much,
do?
it's the economy experience. You're going, you're coming with mummy to an airport, probably means that you've driven 6 hours to get to that airport because there's no direct flights. Probably means that then you're going to get into the economy end of the airplane, and there's not really going to be anything fun for you there. The difference is they have caught a plane with their father, and obviously it's a completely different experience. Getting on a plane, which just from your local airport takes you to wherever you need to go. On there, people bring you, whatever, we've prepared you breakfast, we've prepared these meals. And it is that, and that, that's obviously from when he was Deputy Prime Minister, but they really get lost in that largesse. They stop understanding what it is to be a normal person and have to fly somewhere, and how hard and expensive and excruciating it is with children. That when you get to, like, the difference is when you get to the other end, you're having to lug these tired kids out, and you have to go and find a hire car, and you have to get it. And someone like Albo or Chris Bowen, when they're catching a VIP, it's literally private car to the airport, private plane, private car out of the airport to to the hotel that they're going to. There's no interaction with normal people. There's no interaction with constituents, and there's no interaction or understanding of what it is to have to fly economy and just be a normal person. I think that's where you've got like this. That's why your regional flights suck so badly. That's why they're so expensive, because they don't have to do it. They don't care, it's and they're not paying for it. That's the other thing. If they were paying for it, they would have a completely different idea. I really think that politicians should have to manage their own budgets almost. Like, so instead of getting money, so at the moment they get different money in different pots for different things. So they say, okay, well, you can spend X many thousands of dollars on communication. You can spend X many thousands of dollars on travel. I just think they should just get one big pot, and then they are responsible for every cent that goes out. And it will change the way, like once there's a pot of money and they find out, oh, hang on, if I catch that plane, if I catch that charter, if I catch that VIP, that's going to be $160,000 worth of flights. There's no way that there's no way they're going to spend that. If they could figure out, oh, well, hang on, instead of that, I could buy, I could put on, funding grants for my electorate, and like fund a few, a kitchen for a CWA, and a bus, and like, just little things is what you'd be able to afford out of that budget. But still, it's they do get lost in this sense of entitlement, and people like Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese have been in this world for decades. And when like they complain about opposition, because opposition, you don't have access to the VIP, you don't have access, but you're still getting everything else. You're still getting the cars, and you're still getting the yes sir, no sir, thank you sir. I think that there needs, but this is also city seats as well. Regional seats, you're not getting that. Like, there's no VIP in Danglemar, and there's no Comcar in Danglemar. There's no Comcar if you're if you're out in the sticks, as a member or a senator, but that's why they also choose to live in the city, because they know that they can access that. The Comcar is also about, I think, I need to double check this, but it, like, a single, for example, a single Comcar trip can be something like $7,000. Like, they can be
buy a
excruciatingly
car.
expensive. Pardon?
I could nearly buy a car.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's the value of my car right now. So I guess, like, that's one thing that motivates me, because I feel honestly like I'm stuck between two different worlds. Like, in one hand, I've got a very rural, blue collar background. Then I've got a very rural life here now. And then I go to Canberra and I see this complete, like, I actually just can't stand it. Like, I actually can't stand it. And because you get invited, they invite me to all different things, and I don't go to pretty much anything. I think the last thing I got invited to was a Governor General swearing in. I was like, as if I'm going to go to a swearing in of a Republican
Socialist, Marxist.
socialist Governor General. But this is it. They would fly me down, and and then I get, oh, why don't you go? Why don't you ever go? It's like, for a long time I was blaming the kids, but now it's just, I think now I've grown up enough to just say, because I'm not interested in supporting that crap.
Yeah. Can you give us a bit of an idea of the change in worlds? Like, you're just a cadet reporter and got a bit of experience on the tableland, but then you did go down to New South Wales and into the Sydney, the
Kelly.
Telegraph.
Yeah.
So what was the awakening in regards to going from Tolga to Sydney, lifestyle wise, and B, the pace of work from being in a regional newspaper to a masthead like the Daily Telegraph?
Well, I went from the Tabelander to its daddy newspaper, which was a Townsville Bulletin. And so I worked in Townsville for about 18 months, which was probably the best time of my life. It was just such a great city and such a great newspaper, a really young group.
Don't tell them that, they'll get a big head.
Really awesome editor. The editor at the time was Michael Carroll, who then went on to become the Sunday Telegraph editor, or the Weekend Telegraph editor, who I ended up working for another 6-year stretch as well later on in our lives. So, and the only reason I haven't is he's recently left the paper to go to news.com.au. But yeah, so it was a really great team. And then I won a Young Journalist something award and got sent to London. And that was really horrifically cold to go from Townsville to London in summer. And I didn't love it. Then I had this opportunity to go to the Daily Telegraph. And look, it was basically because my partner at the time was moving to Sydney, had just got a job in Sydney, and he had been struggling to get a job in Townsville. And so that's why I moved. And it really took me about 6 or 7 years before I actually liked Sydney. It took a really long time. I found it very lacking in community. I think that one of the best things about being in local journalism is that you can really feel like part of your community. You can feel like you're, because you're not just like reporting on the police and the kind of those icky, hard news stories. Like, you can also do, like, I campaigned for an upgrade of the local hospital, and it was like rewarding. You were achieving something, and you felt like you were part of something bigger. And then going down to Sydney, I definitely didn't feel like that. I didn't feel like there was it was not my vibe. And then so then worked in Sydney, went onto the news desk at the Daily Telegraph, which is really full on. It was not a job I lasted long at, I have to say. But it was when I was there that they started doing some reform into government in New South Wales, and I thought, and I had a minister knock on my door and say, we'd really want you to come along and be part of this. And so I joined that team and worked for the New South Wales government for a couple of years in there as a senior advisor, I think. And yeah, and that was a good intro to politics, but I did find it but I did want to but then okay, I don't want to basically my relationship was failing, and so I was kind of looking for an out. And my friend said to me, and then I got another knock on the door and they said, we want you to come and work in Canberra. And I was like, okay, bye, Sydney. And it was great because going to Canberra allowed me to do a couple of things. Like I was able to buy a house, which I couldn't buy in Sydney. I would never have been able to afford to buy a home by myself in Sydney ever, but I could do that in Canberra. And then the troubles occurred. So, so then that was a lot. And then that was after that was when I went back regional, tried to get out of Canberra, went to Armidale, and had my babies there. And then I decided to go back to Canberra. I had Sebastian and I'd had Thomas, and I think Thomas was about 8 months old. And and Lou O'Brien, who was a member for Wide Bay, had reached out and said, I want you to come back and work for me. And at that point, I was thinking I was unemployable. I was thinking there was no way I'd ever be able to work back in politics, which had devastated me because I loved that feeling that you got, which was being able to help somebody. That's the big difference that you do get. If you're not in it for yourself, someone can call up and they can say, well, this is the issue that is killing my business, or this is the issue that is killing, what you're about to do, what your government is proposing is going to destroy this industry. And you can try and be that influence to change it. Or, for a lot of things, it's like little stuff, it's community grants, here's, when the community gets a few $1,000 and they can build, they can do something like level out their playing field so the kids aren't twisting their ankles when they're trying to play soccer. Or it's a mobile phone tower where they've called up and they've said, we really want to have connectivity to this region. Can you help? And you're like, well, yeah, come and put a submission in here and we can try and escalate that and try and make sure that you are looked after. It's stuff like, where you've got like more specific stuff with the feds is definitely anything in regards to your Centrelink or your NDIS, where someone's just being treated really terribly by bureaucrats, and you can escalate things up the chain and have it dealt with in a way that they wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. But it's also just like helping communities with stuff. Like the biggest thing that I did with Lou was definitely trying to get all these disparate groups who were fighting various industrialized wind projects in their regions, from like Kilkievan down to New England, and try and get them to talk to each other. And we did that. And they've now formed the National Rational Energy Network, and now they're just superstars. Like Sandra Burke is now the spokeswoman for Advance, and it's like, wow, this really actually happened so quickly with what started as a conversation in the office going, hang on a sec, we need to get all these guys talking to each other because they're all suffering the same thing. But so... sorry, I've just gone on a bit there.
I think a lot of people don't realise how many grants and that are out there. But one thing I find about the grant system, there are some people and some organisations and collectives of those organisations, especially conservationists, who know the system so well and get massive grants. Now, there's the Mackay Conservation Council or something like that. And they got a grant of $600,000 for bloody conservation in Mackay, that $600,000 could have been spread out wide across the community for heaps of different groups, rather than just some people who are really pushing the barrier of climate change. And that's what all they really are. But they're so well organised, and they, through the Queensland Conservation Council, these people are all organised, that they know how to go and get any sort of grant, and they're full on. Whereas it's probably the local school community or sporting club or that needs the help to understand the system, to know where to go and get a grant, sort to improve their life. And in most instances, it might only be $5,000-$10,000 that would make a world of difference to a sports club or something like the junior sports club.
Yeah, and that's where I would, but that's where I would in the first instance. If you're listening and you want a government grant, this is what I would do. First, just make some phone calls, ring your local member, state and federal, and your local council, and say, if there's anything coming up that I can achieve X, Y, Z, put me down on a list and call me. And just make sure that they've got your details. And often they will add you. Sometimes officers actually send out brochures just going, these are the grants which are available to you. And then the other thing that you can do is have a look. I think it's that there is various websites which advertise different grants, but you are right. There are certain community groups which can hire grant writers who also pay themselves through the cost of what it takes to write that grant application. And so you do see undoubtedly just certain groups get ahead because they've got the people who have achieved it before and are good at it before. But you can also do your own grant. There's also grant writing workshops out there, and it's just a matter of ticking the boxes that they want to have in their framework. But increasingly the framework is becoming more and more difficult, and one, I'll point you in the direction of, it's a new music grants fund federally, I believe, where the first priority is to be First Nations. So if you're not of a First Nations, then you're not going to be able to access that grant fund.
Yeah, but anyone can identify as First Nation.
That's right.
my brother-in-law gets his fishing license through because he identifies as First Nation. No? So it's not that hard. But just moving to the change up in Tamworth, how have you settled down on the farm type sort of thing, and is there more than one property, and just how much time does Barnaby spend in the electorate versus out of the electorate? Because I expect he's in demand a fair bit to be in other places.
Yeah. The farm is very big. So most of it isn't ours. We own a portion of it, but the vast majority of it is not ours. It's owned by Barnaby's brothers. And well, technically it's owned by his dad. So it's his dad's estate. God rest his soul. But look, when I first came to the farm, I was mainly looking after Jim, so who's Barnaby's dad. And so the reason that we came here was because Jim wanted to come back to Rutherglen, and he's got this incredible homestead which was built in the very early 1900s, and the history in that building is absolutely magical. It's really awesome. So for the first couple of years I was just with Jim. Then Jim died, and I didn't really know what the point was in staying here. I didn't feel like it was, I felt like I felt very isolated, and I didn't really see a point without Jim, because it just kind of felt like it was just me and the kids. And definitely since he's gone, everyone else visits much less. But now that the boys are going to school locally and stuff like that, like I am aware of more of like like school forces you to be more involved in the community and the valley, but it is a very isolating place. It is a very isolating it's a very isolating experience, but now having them in the school is a lot it's a lot better, and it's definitely, and the school is now the reason why I want to stay here, because it's having this, it's almost like it's almost like a family, like, and it's a very small school, it's very tight knit, and it's just beautiful. I just can't speak highly enough of it. So, but then in terms of how much he's here, I mean, he is here a lot, but sometimes it's an annoying amount of a lot. Like, so sometimes so sometimes he'll get in at 11:30 p.m. But then he's got to leave again at 6:30, and it's like, mate, just let me get a decent night's sleep. So there's that side of thing where he is traveling a lot, but he does get back. He does get back a fair bit. And then whatever travel we can do together, realistically, we do try and do. So like this weekend, we went to an offshore wind rally at the Illawarra together, because that was something that we were able to drive down and drive back, and and it was something that was good for me in terms of journalism, in terms of let's go and talk to these people who are being silenced, who aren't being who don't have coverage there, and they're not being listened to really by their local MPs or I'm not going to say local media. There was actually quite a few local little newspapers there. They were listening, and they were actually really, really awesome. So, but it was a good, so we do try and do a lot of stuff like that together. But then so much of what he does, I just would have like, it just would not be like, the midwinter ball. So, that's a big charity event. Everyone likes to say it's such a big charity event. It's the most boring thing you've ever been to in your life. And it's just like, they love you going though, because this is where they get the shot of you with your partner. And, and I've been once, and it was really dull. So it's just like, you don't want to, so much of, if you allow it, so much of your calendar can just be going to really dull events, listening to really boring speeches by people who really need to be flying economy. And just, I do feel like there's just this grand divide. It is a massive divide between what happens inside that building in Parliament and between what happens in the real world. And and it's everything from, it's the members, it's the staff, it's the the closest that you're going to get to normal people in that building are the security guards, the drivers of the cars, who are actually hilarious and awesome, because they have all the gossip on everyone, because everyone gets in the car and just goes blah 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 on their phone, so they know everything. There's the cleaners and the cooks. That's pretty much it. Then the rest of that ecosystem, being the members, ministry, the ministerial staff, and then the electoral staff. The electoral staff are the ones who are closest to the ground, and so I do think that they're normal people, and they know what's happening out there, and they're also the ones who are picking up the phone to you when you've got a problem with Centrelink, or when you've got a problem with the NDIS. And so I think that but then there just seems to be this gaping hole between what occurs at that extreme end of the CEO, the lobbying, the
I
ministerial.
suppose they are insulators between the public and the
Massive
and
insulators. Massive insulators. And because they wouldn't talk, one thing that surprised me, right, massive, is that if they have a big issue breaking politically, they don't, like, as a journalist, if you've got a big news story breaking, the first thing you do is you want someone who is closest to it on the ground. You want to know what's happening. That's where you go. But it's like the political sphere operates almost inversely to that, where they will go and they'll pick up the phone to the CEO or the founder or someone at the top and say, oh, well, what's happening here? And it's just like the disconnect because of that ecosystem. That is what worries me, and that is what's growing. And it's almost like they use these guys, like, and I've accused Albo of it before, or maybe Chris Bowen of it. Definitely, let's go Murray Watt, because Murray Watt. So he was the agriculture minister. Yeah. And up until Sunday, he was the Minister for Ag. And he's someone who only listens to farmers for as long as he can get a happy snap, pose up for a photo, and then see you later. Then he flies at the pointy end of the plane to Perth, can't face them in public, has to do it over Zoom like we're doing now, to tell farmers, hey, I'm going to shut down the live sheep trade. And so on that phone call is animal activists who are like, yeah. Woo. And then the farmers are there going, oh my God, that is our entire business. And you've just told us that we are now illegal and we have to shut it down. But he is someone who very callously uses people as a photo shoot and then leaves and never discusses anything with them again. And I do think there's this, that's one of the biggest issues that we've got there, is that they, Julianne Finney is another example, right? Julianne Finney, she was a mum of the mum of a Navy what do you I've forgotten her son's name. She was the mother. Okay, can I start that a bit again? Oh, okay. The Julianne Finney was a veteran's mother. She was wheeled out by the Labor Party. The reason I know of her and the reason I met her was because she did a press conference with the Labor Party, which was just so, and it was just so much. And I was just like, wow, why is nobody covering this story? Because she did this press conference, it kind of got cut out halfway through. And so I went and hunted her down and I was like, I want to help tell your story. And so she was calling for a Royal Commission into Veterans Affairs and veteran suicides. And so at that point we got, this was when I was working for Lou O'Brien, who was a frontline, he was a cop, and he worked very closely with a few other members, the member for Braddon, the member for Herbert, the member for Andrew Hasty, Barnaby, and a few others. And we went around with, and Julianne and Jackie Lambie basically, and we kind of stirred it up to get all of these guys to try and cross the floor to call for a Royal Commission into Veterans Affairs. And, we got that. It was awesome. Julianne Finney, however, we've now had this Royal Commission. It's told us some horrific stuff. And now Julianne can't even get a meeting with the Minister for Veterans Affairs in the Labor Party. The same people who were wheeling her out before the election now don't want a bar of her. And it's that which still makes me so wild, because it's just so unfair. And it's the same thing. It's because she's not a consultant. She's not a greaser. She's not a lobbyist. She's a mum who walked the halls of that building until someone listened to what she had to say.
I suppose Labor doesn't want to know it because they have to deliver. And that's one thing the politicians aren't really good at, unless it's something of their particular bent.
Well, Labor is very, very good at being in opposition. And I don't say that like, oh, they're no good at being in government. But I do think they are way better at fighting. They are way better at campaigning than the coalition are, because they just go as low as they need to. And I don't think the coalition does that comparatively well.
Dog in them.
Pardon?
They haven't got enough dog in them.
Yeah, that's right.
Or mongrel, right. Whatever. But where you are, you're sort of partway between Armidale and Tamworth. So as the children grow up and need to go to high school and that, there's, are they going to sort of go to one of those two townships for high school? And then university, you have got the University of New England, or does it just depends on what course they go? They might be going to Sydney. So have you even started to think about that sort of action that
Yeah.
you require family-wise as you go ahead?
Well, I think that what we'll do in terms of, so I am very conscious of the closest high school is an hour and a half. So that's kind of, I don't want to commit them to 3 hours a round trip a day on a bus. So we'll see. There is a, there's a whole pile of very good schools around here. There's also the option of maybe boarding in Sydney. Most of the kids here, because they are so rural, do go to Sydney and board. And it's something that I have not made up my mind on. It will be something that I'm kind of guided by what the boys actually want to do, because I know when I talked to Barnaby and his brothers, they all boarded, and one of them loved it, one of them hated it. One of them was like, yeah, whatever. Some kids really enjoy it and some kids hate it. So I just, want to, I'll be guided by them basically. But, they for university, there is the University of New England here. And it is, I mean, it's the same university that has pumped out some really big players, the Reserve Bank, Michelle from the Reserve Bank. Help me out.
The new one who replaced Lowe.
She's there now. Yeah, she went to UNE. Barnaby, of course, went to UNE. I think there's been a lot of political players who went to UNE over time. And it's a really good university. But I don't, I think I've always traveled a lot, and so I'm cool to just keep traveling. I mean, for the last up until like for 5 years, I was driving to Canberra and back for every parliamentary sitting. So I'm not afraid of like long trips, and and the kids are quite accustomed to the long trips, unfortunately. Poor little things. But they figured it out. They know how to get the business class experience, don't worry, in the back of the car. So yeah, but so we'll see. I mean, the problem that we've got is that it is if really remote, if you're in a really remote area, it is too much. I think it's too much to put a kid on a bus for 3 hours every day. When that's time that they could be playing sport, or that's time that they could be hanging out with their mates or something like that. So I will really be guided by them. The isolation of the place is what makes it so special, but it's it definitely, there's good sides and bad for sure.
Well, the last interview I had was with Luke McCormack from the National Civic Council, and we were discussing about what's available for families in regards to, because their focus is basically family life, keeping the families together. And since we've got since the 80s and that, when we first started up with dinks, double income, no kids sort of thing. Things have moved on to where it's almost impossible for people to get what they want, need, whatever, without two incomes. And to get that in the cities, and there's a lot of services available, from childcare and just other things and allowances and that. Those sort of things just aren't available to people in rural and regional Australia. And sometimes I think it's a little bit unfair that come the time when your children do have to go on board, that there's not some sort of better offset. So when those people have been getting lots of money paid for childcare, over the years and that, the equity for someone suddenly, especially from remote Queensland, they've got no choice but to send their kids to boarding school. the disparity of money given to them over that term of the child's life is much more than a person who's been in the city and getting the childcare for 12 years or whatever.
Yeah, well, this is it. I mean, the Isolated Parents and Citizens Association, I think they came out recently and they said, well, hang on a second. If we do not have our kids go, if we can't afford our kids to go to if we can't afford to send our children to boarding schools, then we are not going to be able to feed you. And the only time that you will notice this is when your shelves are devoid of Australian-made produce. And this is the thing, like this, where my kids go to school now, there used to be 120 children at that school. Now there's 9. And the reason that happened was because of farm work just being degraded over time, and also a massive station shut down. So that's why we lost everybody there. But this is it. Like here's an example, right? So when I was working in Canberra with the boys, I'd pay $170 per day per kid for them to go to the childcare centre between, I think it was 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. where their opening hours. I'd try to get them before that and earlier. But no subsidy. But if you were living in the city and well, if you're a single parent, for that, you would be paying about $80 per kid per week. That's the difference, because all of that will be subsidized. If you live in a city and you have USH or after school care, that's subsidized. If you're in a regional area or a rural area, and you're very much, it's like you're either by yourself or you're relying on neighbors and friends and family, or you have to get a nanny, which is then you have to provide a home. You have to and most want a separate house, like on a cottage on a place. You need to provide them a car. You know, it's a huge amount of outlay to get appropriate childcare for both parents to work. But there's a couple of things I want to say about that. Like, one is we need to value the care, like we need to value people's care more. You know, I think I chose to I think everyone has to make that decision. Like, you're just going to be a bit povo when you've got little kids. I think that's just it. I think that's just, I mean, I know that even when my mum and dad had me, and mum worked, or she was a family daycare provider and she worked the whole time and dad worked the whole time. And we were still a bit povo. I look back at the pictures and I'm like, wow, we were poor. That is an ugly couch. So I think that there's definitely that element to it, which is when you were raising little kids, you were going to be a bit poor. But then I do also feel for people and who have children, and they have to go back to work, because if they don't go back to work, they're going to lose their house. So and I know lots of mums who feel like they're forced to go back to work before they're ready, and that they're missing out on the best stages of their kids' lives because they've got to go and pay a bank. And that sucks, but it's also but yeah, I mean, the person that you had on is right. There's a whole lot of funding models which used to apply for regional people and for rural people, which now don't apply. And so if you are in a city and you're using a city service, you are entitled up into a certain income bracket to have that taxpayer subsidy. But you know, I don't think I have a big problem with just the industrialization of childcare as it is at the moment too. Like having that, it's something that I struggle with, because I don't want to. It's really up to choice, right? it's up to choice. But I preferred the model that I had in this area, which was a family daycare mum. I knew that the kids were really happy to go there. They weren't over, they just genuinely seemed to have a happier experience outside of that, outside of the center atmosphere. But it's all down to choice, isn't it? So I don't want to shit on some other.
I think sometimes the choice of on mum staying home has basically been taken away because they don't value that. No. They spend multi-billions of dollars on the childcare industry. Maybe if they directed half of that back to sort of allowance for parents who one parent stayed at home, we'd probably get a better outcomes and probably save some money. And that seems to be the problem. The choice for stay-at-home parents isn't there. I mean, stay-at-home parents basically means you're going to forego the possible income, and that's got to lower your standard of living and your prospects for the future as far as building up your retirement.
Yeah, Matt Canapés had a really good bill on this, which was income splitting. So where they tax, so you can say, well, if I'm working this many hours and I'm earning $200,000 a year, then I'm going to pay my wife $100,000 a year, and then we'll both be paying tax on $100,000 a year and paying less tax than we would otherwise. And I thought that was a good idea. But the other thing is too, but if you even try and be a stay-at-home mum, it comes with so much venom. Why aren't you contributing? Why aren't you contributing to the economy? It's like, well, wait. So what I'm doing right now, breastfeeding this child, isn't valuable to you. Raising this baby so it doesn't have anxiety and it doesn't have he doesn't have any issues about whether mum's there or not. Why has it been reduced this much? And you see these women who are just, oh, we're feminists, and they come out and smash trad wives, and I'm not a trad wife at all. Far from it. Just ask Barnaby. Far from it. But I still respect if they want to stay at home and have kids and look after them and cook and increasingly homeschool, go for it.
But the other thing is what people don't realise, what people saying that it's not valuable to stay at home. Well, the thing is, for every kid that goes to childcare and has to be subsidised, you, the taxpayer, are paying a fortune. So actually, for everyone kids that's not actually going and collecting there's a subsidy system and making these childcare providers wealthy, is giving you a national benefit because the government doesn't have to spend that money in the first place, you fools. So there is a value, there is a monetary value and a monetary savings to the taxpayer in that. If people look after their own children, they have that interaction with their community, which is huge. I remember when we had kids, there was lots of women around the place who looked after their own children. There was a local play group. There was local community. There was much more interaction between people. There was much more help if something went wrong. If some unfortunate thing befell you and you had to go away or something like that, there was always people to dive in and help because you had that community. So someone could sit down. I reckon a good economist. Analytical economists could sit down and actually value what it is worth to the community when a child is maintained and looked after in their own home. I reckon the figures would probably make people fall over compared to what we're actually paying out, as taxpayers for this.
Well, there's what you're paying as taxpayers, and then there's the terrible money that you're paying people to do this essential childcare work. So this is the thing, is that I was paying $170 per kid per day in Canberra. Meanwhile, one of the girls there, I would pay at nighttime if I had something that we had to go to at night, right? And so I'd pay her at night. And because she was getting $26 an hour. So even though we were paying massive money to have our kids there, she was actually getting nothing while the centre was getting everything, and the taxpayer was the one who was paying. Oh, well,
That's
actually,
right.
sorry. In our position, the taxpayer wasn't paying. We were paying ourselves. But you know, for most people.
Yeah. Well, let's face it, a lot of people became millionaires when the childcare system came in. And then the same like NDS. There's plenty of multi-millionaires now who are providers for them.
Oh.
So the government is a means of making some people's fortune. But just moving the conversation on, you're now in New England, Barnaby's hometown. What's the feeling there in regards to, like, he's the National Party? There's probably a National Party member now back in charge of the state seat there. But in the state seats, the National Party has lost ground over the years. I mean, if you go back to 2016, they lost Orange. Then 19, they lost Barwon and Murray, and they still don't hold those seats. And your leader of the National Party there is the member for Dubbo, and I don't remember his name. I did look it up once. I quickly forgot because I didn't want to know, because the first thing I looked up for him, there was him in a paddock with a shovel, breaking ground for a new wind farm or new renewable energy hub. So to me, do you have this connection with the regional areas now? So you must have a bit of a feel on who best represents them. Do you think the National Party has lost its way a little bit, especially in the state level?
How much trouble can I get into? I think look, we spoke earlier about different lobbyists, and that is who there is someone that the National Party has in New South Wales has fallen into the grasp of, and until he's shifted, I don't think that we are going to see any improvements. I think there is within the party it is incredibly factionalized, and it's hard to identify what those factions are. And I've had journalists over time say to me, is it coastal and inland? No. Is it Barnaby versus Barilaro? No. Is it it is something which is harder to identify, but it is more that there are it is more that there are those who are reliant upon one person to fundraise for them, and there are those who are not. And I think that we've had a lot of examples recently where we have not seen the Nats represent their local areas. And one example of this was a former member for the Northern Tablelands, Adam Marshall, who was a very, very good local member until he resigned to go and work for Origin. And it was really galling to me, as someone who had gone to a lot of these community events and seen Adam up on stage saying how they were inappropriate developments and they were the wrong developments for the region, only to go and work for the company bringing in these developments. Then, what we saw in Murray, what we saw in Barwon, what we saw in Orange, what we saw, and then now obviously we've got Andrew G, who's stepped away from the Federal Nationals Party room in Calais. The problem is once you have the shooters or an independent come in, regional towns love them, and you will never get them out, and they will be there and they will own that seat for as long as they want. So what this has done is it's reduced the New South Wales Nationals' power. They are now just 2 bad by-elections away from losing party status. So what that means is if you lose party status, it means less staff. It has a big impact on how you're positioned strategically and who's there to help you. Like, even just dealing with any kind of shadow minister in New South Wales, they don't have anyone helping them. It's their EO staff, who are the same people who you need to talk to when you call up and you say, hey, I've had this issue with a hospital, or I've got this issue in my town about the local schools not being funded enough because Labor slashed the funding to public schools or whatever. It's that same person who you talk to who's going to be the same person who's going to be preparing estimates notes for their boss. So we already have this they already really don't have any political staffers in opposition, which does hobble them quite a bit. But they also hobbled themselves by just trying to appease this they trying to appease the very, very left. And you saw that with them trying to ban greyhounds, and that was one of the major reasons that they lost all those seats. And there's a reluctance for them to even admit that.
But it was madness. I mean, that followed their trying to amalgamate the councils and that. But the thing is, it sits on, as an outside observer, that smacked of being too closely joined at the hip with the Liberal parties. Now, that if we haven't got a national party in Queensland. They merged in 2008, and despite Canavan saying he's a national or something like that, it's garbage. He belongs to the LNP, run out of Brisbane, and does exactly what they say. He gets a bit of a free rein now that he's not a minister and that, and he's out of government. But the fact is, he belongs to the LNP, run by Brisbane. Nationals, at least in New South Wales, is separate, and I mean they need to redefine themselves. And if you go back in history, they were the country party and the people of the land. Now they need to somehow get back into that mode and get out of that bloody Sydney mind think, and satisfying the people around Sydney and that, and they need to have a point of difference from the Liberals. I mean, you can still go to coalition when you're in government, when you form a government, you needed to, but you don't have to march in lockstep all the time.
Put it this way,
be able to have your own policies.
When I worked for a Nationals minister in New South Wales, put it this way, right? I made friends with two girls. One was from Taree and one was from Orange. We were the only ones from regional areas. The only ones in that whole building. Like nearly everyone else went to school in Mossman. They went to school in Cronulla. They went to school. They had only ever lived and breathed Sydney, and yet they were trying to tell us how regional policy should work.
The national headquarters should be in bloody Tamworth, Dubbo, or somewhere like that. It shouldn't be in bloody Sydney. They need to say, well, Sydney is them, and this is us, and have the difference. And the thing is, you're just talking about the shooters and fishers and farmers. Well, the shooters, fishers, farmers, they held Orange, Barwon and Murray. But the people who ran the shooters and fishers came from Sydney. They were Sydney-centric.
Yeah.
It didn't take long for them to lose control of those seats because they were marching to the tune of what was happening in Sydney. And that got up the nose of, firstly, they did the dirty on Helen Dalton down the Murray. Then gradually the other two in Barwon and Orange, it dropped out as well. So
yeah.
you can't, if you're supposed to represent the regional people, you can't have that connection to the city. You have to get back into the mindset of them and us. And I think if you go back to the 1960s and that, when you had Charles Cutler and Askin, they were always at it. They weren't mates. You know, they had the differences. And it was only because Cutler forced Askin to give the people in New England their referendum in 1967. You got a chance of getting a new state. Oh, that unfortunately didn't happen, but that would certainly set the difference. And if nationals want to re-establish themselves, here's a policy for them: new regional states.
Yeah.
lead the charge on that.
I think there's this element of, I think there has been there's Oh, it's hard what I can say about this and what I can't, because they already, like, I'm not a member, obviously, and they already don't let me into their things. And it's like, Peter Credlin is she is always getting disciplinary behavior, getting disciplinary charges put on her by the Liberal Party, but they still allow her to be a member. So that's the difference. The Liberals will let you be a member. But so I, but I do think there are genuinely good people in there. I really, really do. I just think that they're outnumbered at the moment, because they do have this group who um are under the influence, under the spell of somebody who's quite powerful and can make money for them. And he just says, I'm going to raise money for you, and you do what I say. And the local government amalgamation was a really big part of that. Like, that was where they had the review done by Graham Sampson. He had done a review of all councils. He said, if you merge all these regional councils, it's not going to work. It's just going to make them poorer. Don't do it. And then you had Mike Baird decide, well, we're gonna amalgamate them anyway. I do think that they should have amalgamated more Sydney councils, maybe even just divided Sydney into two councils. There is no reason to have the mass they've got so many duplicates that they just don't need. You don't need 42 general managers. Like, you just don't. But
Not within a few square miles anyway.
yeah, exactly. And we've especially, but merging many regional councils, it's just been like the merger of Armidale and Guyra is one that comes to mind. That was really negative. And like, now you've got Guyra, which is one of the coldest towns ever. That, and you've got the council there based in Armidale saying, oh, we should ban wood-fired heaters. That's the only heat they've got. Like, in Guyra, it gets colder. It gets as cold as the North Pole. When, like, your pipes crack, your toilet cracks. So I do think that the regional amalgamation hasn't it was done for the wrong reasons, and it was done because this lobbyist felt that if he was going to lose Liberals from councils in Sydney, then the Bush should have to feel the pain as well. And then, of course, we went on to lose, was it Orange at that time?
Orange was the first one to go.
Yeah, it was Orange.
2016 in the by-election first, and then he
Yeah,
held it.
was that Phil Donato?
Yep.
Yeah.
I've spoken to him. He's a good guy.
And this is the thing. I'll tell you something. Since then, they've gone over and they're trying to lure Joe McGurr. They're trying to lure Phil Donato. They're trying to lure Helen Dalton. And they're going, hey, come over and join us. And they're like, we're not going to join you, because the reason we came was because you weren't representing us the way that you should have. But I do think that sometimes you need to, I do think that I don't know. I don't know. I would not get excited for anything to happen in the short term. I think that just for example, the party met recently for a state conference, and all of the motions that were put forward to have about renewables, and I don't like that term, the intermittent power factories, which future landfill. Every single motion that had been put up did not make it to the conference paper. So someone in there had gone. Someone in the leadership had said, nope, we're not going to be discussing this. We're not going to be talking about wind. We're not going to be talking about solar. This is the issue of our time. This is what every single regional community is talking about. It is like, honestly, Bill, like, you would know, but this is every community going, you're going to do what to us? We're going to compulsory acquire your land. We're going to make you pay rates on this land, but you're not going to be able to use this land because there's going to be a transmission line over it. We're going to make it so hard for you to run your business that you just won't be able to do it anymore. I mean, yeah, you can put cattle under there, but don't you go there. And we'll just, we're going to need this part of your land for this road. We're going to need this part of your land for this road, and you can't access it. But don't worry, we'll pay you $10,000 a year. For how long? Oh, 20 years. Oh, right. So not for the life of the project. No, no, no. You know, and you can't, like, it's the biggest issue. And I know so many members who said we put up a motion for this to be debated, but when it got to conference, nobody wanted it was off the list. It couldn't get through on the conference paper. And so they were just going, well, what a waste of time.
Time to find a new party.
Pardon?
It's time for them to find a new party. If people are not getting listened to, they'll go somewhere else eventually. You're frustrated.
Well, the problem is, Bill, and you know this, is how hard it is. It is so hard to create a new party, and it's so hard to get the structure in place and then the funding in place. And then sometimes you go for what to create a coalition anyway, where we're not going to be able to do what we should be doing. I mean, maybe you're right. I would like to see a new party. But
or those people will go and support independents or something like that who actually speak for them. Look, we've gone over the hour, but you did touch on one subject there that I'd like to have another episode about, and that's you're talking about the number of kids that have disappeared from your local school. It's a natural phenomenon that's happened for generations, but that should be the reverse. If the regions were developing as to their potential, you would think that more and more people would be coming in, sort of thing. But we haven't seen that. And in Queensland, we're really starting to notice that legislation that comes in makes it harder for people on the land to do their job and make a good living out of it. That now even succession plans are basically falling apart because the kids don't see a future in it because it's all too hard, because they see mum and dad slugging away, 60, 70 hours a week, then heaps of time on paperwork and sort of frustrated with having to do a lot of the legislative requirements just to manage their land, sort of thing. So maybe we can come back and have a discussion on, your thoughts in regards to your regions, in regards to how numbers are shrinking on the land.
And it's also just one other thing quickly is that it's also because you're not allowed to build another house on your property. Like, so I've got here 100 acres, and so say that I wanted to put dad in a separate dwelling on 100 acres, I'm not allowed. If I try and do that, they'll come and take the taps out of this house. This is a real life thing. It's just happened to my neighbor where he's got his dad living in a caravan on his place and he wants to build him a separate dwelling. And they said, no, the only way that he can is if he builds a granny flat and his dad lives in the granny flat literally on top of them. But they've got 100 acres. Why should they?
Yeah. Well, these are all the frustrations of people
arbitrary
in the regions. And it's like you said, no one's listening to us. So we've got to make them listen somehow. But look, I want to thank you very much for your time. I'm sure you've got to get off and do hundreds of house duties.
I have my babysitter. She's like, where are you?
but really, thanks very much for your time. Look, I hope we can do it again in the coming months and really talk about this issue about what sort of freedoms people have back in the regions in regards to getting ahead with development, getting projects, and just living better without the government over their shoulder, without threatening
increasingly less freedoms, fly
drones over your property on a daily basis to make sure your cattle or that not wearing a track in your ground or something like that, or you haven't put a peg in somewhere that you shouldn't have. So maybe we can come back and talk about that, basically freedoms for rural people to get on with their lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Okay, Vikki, look, thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. Thank you so much, Bill. Really appreciate it.